and then I'm going to pass it off to Melissa, who's going to introduce our presenter for today, Sandy Utt. And just a few things. I already mentioned the recording. So this will be recorded and available live on our website either later today or early tomorrow. And in addition to that, you can actually ask questions during the webinar. We have staff on hand to field your questions, and we may, Sandy may be able to stop and answer some of those questions during the webinar, or we will address any remaining questions that aren't answered during the webinar afterwards. And we'll just sort of be going through those instructions during the webinar. So this is going to be a very candid webinar, sort of loosely scheduled, and we're going to go ahead and get started soon. And there we go. So first of all, I just want to make sure that everybody all the attendees, there's only about 9 of us right now, so since it's so few, if anybody's having trouble hearing right now, if anybody's having any technical issues, please send a message to the staff, and I can help you out once I pass the presentation over. And Melissa, I'm going to hand it over to you in just a second. I just want to make sure that everybody is hearing us. And I'm sorry, we're just having some technical difficulty here. Okay, so Melissa, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you, and if you want to introduce Sandy, and we'll go ahead and get started. Melissa?
Thank you, Phil, for handing it over. Thanks, everyone, for joining today's webinar on using the NSAC for assessing a campaign course's learning outcomes. Hope that you'll enjoy today's presentation, be able to have multiple takeaways for your classroom. Again, my name is Melissa Wong. I'm the Manager of Education Services, and today I have the honor of introducing our presenter, Dr. Sandra Utt. Sandy got both her bachelor's and her master's from West Virginia University, and she received her PhD in journalism and mass communication from Ohio University. Sandy has been an advertising and public relations research and graphics consultant in her previous life before becoming a faculty member, and her teaching interests are media planning, theories, research, and design. She is currently co-editor of Newspaper Research Journal, which is a publication of the newspaper division of the Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communication. In addition, she serves on accrediting site visit teams for the Accrediting Council on Education in Journalism and Mass Communications, where she evaluates assessment programs. So hence her teaching the topic today. Sandy is the incoming chair of the Academic Committee of the American Advertising Federation, and she also serves on the National Student Advertising Competition Committee. Lastly, she's an active participant in journalism and mass communication, academic and professional organizations, and Sandy has published numerous scholarly articles. So before I hand it over to Sandy, I wanted to give everyone a quick summary of what the National Student Advertising Competition is, because, again, Sandy will be talking about that very intimately today. The National Student Advertising Competition is a signature program of the AAF Education Services Department. It provides practical hands-on experience for college students across the nation and helping them to transition from the world of academia into their first entry-level position in the advertising industry. The competition structure is set up where each year AAF partners with a corporate client to co-author a case study that presents a real-world marketing challenge that the client is currently facing. This year, it's JCPenney, who is our corporate client. And college teams across our college chapters throughout the nation will come together to develop an integrated marketing communications campaign that is in response to the case study marketing challenge. And then these student teams will first compete at the district level within the respective districts, and then first place winners will then advance to the national competition. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and hand it over to Sandy Utt, and she will start to tell you how you can use the NSAC as an assessment tool. And without further ado, Sandy.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for coming to the first webinar. We're really excited about this, and I'm excited that we're going to be able to do this for the AAF. And I'm particularly excited with using the NSAC. As you all know, it's important for everyone now to be, those of us who teach advertising, we probably want to use the NSAC as part of our assessment plan. So that's the reason for the webinar. I'm having a little bit of trouble. Oops, sorry. I need to. Okay. So the reason for the webinar is to help you guys use the NSAC as part of an assessment plan. So why are we worried about student learning outcomes? Those of you who are in regional state universities, and it doesn't really matter whether you're in the South, because that's the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, or whether you're in California, that's the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, or way up in New England, that's the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. They all have accrediting bodies. They are all using student learning outcomes to assess programs, as is journalism and mass communication bodies and business colleges. So it doesn't really matter where you teach advertising. All of a sudden, assessment is very important. So student learning outcomes replaces a traditional assessment model that typically uses how many degrees faculty have, the number of full-time faculty, what their research productivity is, the resources, the facilities, and so on. That's the old way of doing it. The new way to do it is what we're going to be talking about today. So instead of asking what do faculty need to teach, the student learning outcomes model question becomes what do students need to know and what do they need to learn. Okay, so there's some terms we need to go through, and I want to very quickly go through these so everybody's on the same page in terms of the words you need to have. The first one is assessment. What exactly is assessment? Well, it's any process that measures what students have learned, including course-specific techniques, like, for example, the plans book that you have to create in campaigns. You need people to help you write that. In order to do the campaigns, you have to probably have primary and secondary research. Those are assignments that are all part of things that you can measure. Assessment also includes things like program strategies, which often are exit interviews that are designed to test specific content knowledge. I know we have a senior exam here at the University of Memphis, and it's possible that you also have that. So this focuses on academic content, and that's the primary concept behind student assessment. Okay, another term you need to know is evaluation. Evaluation is not just testing. It's not just how well they do on tests. It evaluates their entire academic experience. And typically you look at class interaction, effectiveness of courses, the quality of student support services, what kind of lab work do they have, what kind of labs are available, and how often are they open, and so on. So that's all part of evaluation. And another term that everybody needs to be aware of is learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are based on the knowledge or set of skills that you determine by your curriculum. So if you have in your advertising curriculum, if you have courses like advertising layout classes or advertising copywriting classes or advertising research classes, then you have acceptable skills or knowledge that you know what your students need to have in those particular courses, and that then becomes your learning objectives. Learning objectives are derived from the classes you have. So if you have, for example, a course called Advertising Campaigns that is a capstone class, then you will write learning outcomes for that particular class. And your class syllabus should have a list of those learning outcomes, and we'll talk more about how they should be written. Now, most of us teach more than one course, and so what you need to think about is what kind of culminating experience do you want in your capstone course, like your campaigns class, and therefore you would know then what kind of experiences they need to have in the courses before they get to campaigns. So each syllabus then should have a description of how the students will be evaluated, with each assignment specifically stating what the outcomes to be evaluated would be. Okay, another term that we need to talk about are things like indirect measures. Now, this is these indirect measures are measures that reflect the quality of the program, and those are typically things like student retention rates, grades, internship supervisors. Those are called indirect because they involve comparative data like grade distribution, how often, what's happening right now is a lot of schools are concerned about how long it takes students to graduate, so that's graduation data. Outside evaluations would be things like internship, job placement, and so on. And then your participant reflection like student interviews and student surveys. A direct measure are the ones that most of us are familiar with, and those are things that we look at in terms of faculty assessment of student performance. And those include things like objective tests, exit exams, portfolios, and the capstone experience. So your campaigns class would be an example of a direct measure. And when you write up when you sit down and think about how you're going to use the NSAC as a means of assessment, you want to remember that this class is an example of a direct measure. Okay, so here's some steps in how to do it. First of all, the first step is look at existing learning outcomes. Now, guys, I am a firm believer, and I say this over and over and over again, in not reinventing the wheel. So what I would do at my university or at your university is I would look at established outcomes used by accrediting bodies. There's 2 accrediting bodies that you want to go to, depending on whether you're in a journalism or mass communication program or whether you're in a business school. If you're in a journalism and mass communication program, you want to go to the Accrediting Council on Education in Journalism and Mass Communication, ACEJMC. Standard 9 is assessment. You look and see what they look at for Standard 9, and we'll get into that in a minute. If you're in a College of Business, you want to go to the Association to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business, AACSB. They have 4 standards, Standards 16, 18, 19, and 21. And those 4 standards are called Achievement of Learning Goals. Go to those. So depending on what area you teach in your school, that will help you go to where you want to get your outcomes. Okay? All right, so that's step 1. Continuing with step 1. Now, I'm more familiar with the journalism mass comm part of it. So what I'm going to be doing in the next few minutes is talking about that part. If you're in a college of business, look and see what things you can take from this and use for your college of business. Now there are professional values and competencies. There happen to be 12 of them that ACEJMC uses. And I think that 8 of them work for the NSAC. So 8 of the 12 professional values and competencies work. And here they are. The first one is students will demonstrate an understanding of gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and as appropriate, other forms of diversity in domestic society in relations to mass communication. So I would say to you that you could use this to help you understand, for example, understanding the target audience. So you could write a student learning outcome based upon the professional value and competency of understanding gender, race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. The next one that I think would be useful would be students will understand concepts and apply theories to the use and presentation of images and information. And this, of course, has to do with how well the students understand the creative concept, understand the target audience, and use those images and information to produce print ads and television ads. The last one on this page, students will conduct research and evaluate information by methods appropriate to the communication profession in which they work. That obviously has to do with your secondary and your primary research. So that one works too. The next 4 that fit for the NSAC are students will write correctly and clearly in forms and styles appropriate for the communication profession, audiences, and purposes they serve. This one I think works for the speech that everybody writes for the NSAC. It's a 20-minute slide and presentation, and I think you could probably write some student learning outcomes to fit this very nicely. Obviously, the plans book fits very nicely there, but in addition to the plans book, the speech, I think, fits also. The second one on this slide is students will critically evaluate their own work and those of others for accuracy, fairness, clarity, appropriate styles, and grammatical correctness. That's how well, obviously, each section of the book is written, how well the speech is written. It depends on how you set it up. Usually, faculty advisors have their students send sections of the book to them individually so that they're not all reading everything at one time. And that would be a way for you to see how well they were writing for accuracy and fairness based upon the writing of the book. The third bullet on this page, student will apply basic numerical and statistical concepts, has to do obviously with things like when you do your research. I know when I've gone to presentations, I'll hear students say that they did X number of surveys, and they use SurveyMonkey, and then they use percentages, and sometimes they talk about means, and all of that then would be, you could use that research then to look at the student learning outcomes for this professional value and competency. Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2 then is writing student outcomes. All right, so how do you write a student outcome? Because I've got some examples coming up. The capstone course, the NSAC campaigns class, is an example of a capstone course. The capstone course is an excellent method of a direct measure assessment because what you're looking at is several courses that they've had before they get to this. So you're looking at their overall learning experience. So what you can do is, probably what you do is you divide people into various groups. So you've got some creative people, some research people, maybe you've got a branding group, so that students are allowed to demonstrate their strengths and their ability to recall, understand, and apply knowledge. So that's really what we're looking at. And the capstone expectation should be a display of all 3 levels of learning. So being able to recall, being able to understand, and being able to apply. And the capstone course is especially good for the application, because what they're doing is they're remembering what they learned in their creative classes, they're remembering what they learned in strategies, and then they're applying that strategy then to their creative execution. So that's why the capstone course is such a great example of something that you could use in your assessment. All right, so here's some student outcomes that you might want to look at. And again, I am a firm believer in not reinventing the wheel. So here's some that I think you could probably use the next time you have to do this. For example, you will write a student outcome that will say something like, students will communicate a convincing approach to satisfying the creative objectives. So you have in your NSAC, doesn't really matter what the sponsor is, whether it's JCPenney or last year's State Farm, you have creative objectives, and you're going to assess how well they communicated a convincing approach to satisfying the creative objectives, whatever they are. So that would be one example of a student learning outcome that would have to do with creativity. The next one works really well with research, and that students will accomplish a realistic balance of secondary and primary research. And you can use that then to understand how well, if you understand how well primary research comes out of the secondary information they already have. Racine, do we have any questions?
Hi, Sandy. No, there's no questions right now from the audience.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks. So the next example of a student learning outcome has to do with understanding the target audience. So you would write something like, students will demonstrate an understanding of the needs of the target audience and how to appeal to them. So, for example, you're going to do demographic and psychographic information, and what you want to think about then is how you can look at the target audience and look at the information that the students have come up with and measure how well they understand the needs of the target audience and what emotional buttons they need to push to get to the target audience. The next one has to do with your integrated marketing communication, and that will be something like, students will demonstrate a convincing synergistic impact of the advertising, publicity, public relations, and promotions. Now this one has to do with whatever your client's asking for. So if your client needs, for example, direct marketing or direct mail or interactive, then you would add that to this list. So because an integrated communication plan is all about synergy, and so you would ask yourself how well, or you'd ask the students, you'd assess the students based upon how well they had come up with a synergistic impact of the elements that were required within the plan. And then the last one on this slide is students will use media to reach a diverse and multicultural audience. And of course that fits very nicely with most plans, because most plans now require that they have some ethnic audience included. And so you're going to ask yourself how well, or you're going to ask the students, you're going to assess the students on how well that media reaches the diverse and multicultural audience. So there's some examples of some student outcomes. And again, they're pretty, once you understand, see what I'm saying is you start from those professional values and competencies, and then you look and see what the accrediting body really expects you to do, and that's where you get them from, because you go to the websites of those accrediting bodies, and then you write student outcomes that fit those measurable outcomes that the accrediting body expects. And of course, you write those outcomes based upon what you know the NSAC is all about. Okay. Sorry. All right, so step 3 then would be evaluating the NSAC project. And I'm going to suggest to you that this is pretty straightforward. As you go through what a typical plans, book, and speech look like, then you should be able to come up with some questions that you would put then in a matrix, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So obviously, the capstone project should follow a logical flow of information and ideas. So that might be something that you would ask. You would assess how well it does. And then you would also look at key concepts to make certain that each part of the plan would be included. So let's continue with that. These are just some obvious things that you include in your plan that you would assess. How well does the executive summary demonstrate the recognition of the problem or challenge and the highlight of the campaign's response in the key areas? So you're asking, how well does it do what it should do? The same thing is true with the situation analysis. This section usually has internal or external analysis, and so the question would be, how well does the situation analysis do that? And you would know what internal and external analysis would be expected, and so you would write your questions of assessment based on what you expect. So you have to know what the expectations are, which of course everybody, I'm certain that all people who teach a campaigns class know, and then you would write those questions based upon what is expected. Okay, the next one has to do with SWOT analysis. These are, again, pretty straightforward. Your SWOT analysis, often what you'll find is there's going to be a disconnect between the SWOT findings and the campaign strategy or the primary research goals. And so that's one of the things you may want to assess. How well did the students get over that disconnect? Did they do that in the right way? And that would be something that you would assess, whether they were able to do that or not. How well did they choose the SWOT strategy or provide a problem and opportunity statement connecting the secondary research to primary research? How well did they do that? Okay, target audience identification is the next area of the NSAC. So the question is, how well did the students segment their target audience by specific demographic, geographic, psychographic, or behavioral traits? How well did they do this? Did the plan demonstrate the target's connection and value to the client? These are questions that you would ask, and the expectation would be that you would then assess how well the students had done. Had the students taken themselves out of the equation and arrived at defining the client's best case prospects from secondary and primary research, or do they see themselves as the target audience, and therefore they're having problems with evaluating the target audience? I know that's always the case. For me, I have to constantly tell my students, now don't forget, you are not the target audience. Okay, the next one is the campaign theme. Does the campaign develop an overarching campaign theme and strategy that pulls together all strategic and tactical elements into a unified, cohesive, and single-minded plan? Does it do that? What questions might you ask that would identify whether the plan does that or not? How would you look at the overarching campaign theme and strategy? How would you define how well they pull together the strategic and tactical elements? Again, you have to know what to expect, and then based upon the expectations, you then write the assessment. Then the next evaluation might be the overall integrated marketing communication objectives, and these are things that are pretty straightforward. Are the objectives stated in concrete measurable tasks? Did they specify the target audience? Is there a benchmark starting point, and so on? These are pretty straightforward. What is the degree to which these can be changed by the advertising, and what is the specific time period? Okay, and then also sometimes you might have some issues about marketing. How have the positive influences on brand equity been established based upon increasing brand association, brand knowledge, brand image, and marketing objectives? So these are things that you would ask, and this is what you would write your questions on. Then you might also look at things like communication goals. Are the communication objectives stated clearly? Do they recognize how important brand awareness is, attitude or liking, trial, purchase to accomplish increases in awareness, comprehension, conviction, and action? You know, a lot of these questions are almost how judges at the district might judge your plans book. So you might turn yourself into, think about yourself as a judge and ask yourself, how well did your students write these ideas? Okay. So here's something for the marketing for the IMC strategy development. How well are they in terms of gaining the student recognition that the overarching corporate strategy dictating the tone and direction? And have they shown an understanding of corporate culture, marketing, and communication? The next one has to do with IMC tactics. This has to do with the creative brief, the creative strategy, direct marketing, sales promotion, public relations. How do they all fit together? Okay. The next one has to do with media. Does the plan include objectives, strategies, whether it's flighting, continuing, or pulsing? Is the schedule clear about the reach and frequency requirements, total GRPs, cost per thousand, geographic weighting and response and seasonality, and the balance of traditional and non-traditional, and the budget? So these are some questions that you might ask for the media question. Again, these are all questions that you would ask so that you could assess. And then the budget. Is it clear? Is it broken down clearly? Are the allocations, do they meet the client's objectives? Does the plan recommend co-ops or partnerships or value-added components to extend the value of the plan? And the last one is evaluation. And does the plan provide for the ability to measure the success of the campaign? Does the plan examine ROI scenarios? And does the plan recommend monitor and control techniques during the campaign timeline? So all of those then would be things that you would think about. All right, step 4 then is to actually assess it. So you come up with these questions, and then you have a matrix. So let me open up this matrix and show you what I'm talking about. So here's an example of a matrix that you would set up. So what you have, guys, is here would be your problem-solving questions. And here's your problem-solving. I've given you 2 examples. Here's some critical thinking questions. Here's some strategic planning questions, and so on. And I want to show you these also in a minute. Now, you would have to say, okay, there's 5 levels that the students might look at. Let me increase this a little bit. Excuse me, let me work with this. Okay. So let's say that you said that excellent was worth 5, very good was worth 4, and excellent, by the way, is demonstrates superior understanding and application. Very good is they demonstrate strong knowledge, but application is not outstanding. Adequate, minimal ability to apply concepts, minimal ability to include but that include deficiencies, and not adequate would be unable to or unwilling to perform. So all those questions that you came up with, you would then go through and rate. Let's say, for example, that this plans book generated primary and secondary research for product category, media, and or consumers, and this person got, let's say they got a 3. So you'd put a 3 there. Manages time and deadlines and results with group. Let's say they were very good, so that would be a 4. All right? And the next one would be critical thinking. Identifies primary and secondary marketing objectives. Let's say they did a 4 on that. Derives solutions and objectives. Let's say they got a 3 on that. Identifies persuasive arguments. Let's say they got a 4 on that. Strategic planning. Creates integrated communication program. Let's say they got a 4 on that. Anticipate sales objectives. Let's say they got a 2 on that. Didn't do very well there. And then down here is execution. Now you would go through and do all of these for all the questions that you've just developed based upon what we went through earlier. And after you did all of this, you would come up with a number. Now again, you're expecting excellent, you're grading them excellent, very good, adequate, barely adequate, and not adequate. So that's pretty straightforward. And you develop the questions, which are down here, and you just go through and you fill in the numbers. And then let's go on and continue. So after you've done that, step 5 is your findings. So you set your criteria for success and your target levels. And this might be something that you would set. Now this you do beforehand so that you have some sense about where you want to go. You expect that 55% of your students will be judged as having excellent or very good skills. So after you've added all those up, you would say, okay, I didn't get quite 55%. 35% of my students would be judged as having adequate or barely adequate skills. That would be the 3. This is excellent would be 5, very good would be 4, adequate would be 3, barely adequate would be 2, and 10% would be judged as not having adequate skills. That would be the 1. So you go through and come up with an average, and then you would say, this is how my students were assessed. Now you would do that maybe the first year you did this, and then the second year you did this, and this is typically what assessment plans call for, is then to take action based upon what you've done. You would then take action as needed. So in about 35 minutes, I've given you a real basic concept about what to do for assessment. Again, going back, you have to understand the process in terms of the measures, and then you set up some goals. You develop your criteria, and then you actually measure, find out how well your students are doing, and then the next time you do it, you look to see where you can improve them, and then you take action on that. Okay, the last slide I wanted to show you today were my references, and there's 2 websites here. One is ACEJMC's website, that's the Accrediting Council on Education in Journalism and Mass Communication. And then your other website is the Association to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business, and that's where they have their standards. And then the last site is a book on assessing media education that's very good. And then if you have my email address right there if you need to contact me, and I would be more than willing to help you, to walk you through anything. Now I know it's rather quick today, but I was hoping that we might have some time for Q&A at the end.
Hi, Sandy. Actually, we do have some questions for you.
Okay. All right.
Neil Alperstein wants to know, are you assessing individual students for the class as a whole?
I am assessing individual students in some respects and groups in some respects, yes. So, for example, if I have one student who's turning in a marketing plan, then yes, I'm assessing that one student. If I have 2 or 3 people who are turning in the creative, then I'm assessing 2 or 3, depending on what section of the book. Correct. Because one of the things that campaigns does is it forces students to work in groups, and that is typically an outcome that you want to assess. How well do the students work as a group? So the answer to that is both.
Thank you, Sandy. Also, John wants to know, in your assessment, how do you distinguish what the instructor and the student team accomplish together from what the students are able to do on their own?
Could you ask that again, please?
Of course. John wants to know, in your assessment, how do you distinguish what the instructor and the student team accomplish together from what the students are able to do on their own?
That's a very good question. And that's tricky because a lot of times the final book represents faculty members' input, in some cases heavily editing it. So you would have to look at how well the students were able to do it before you actually did the final edit. And it depends on how you do it. I know at some schools they've got groups, you know, you've got a really large class, and some students are divided into groups within the class, and then they turn in their project as a group, and then the whole group is judged together. And some schools, they don't do that. They have a special class that does the NSAC. So you'd have to think about how well you do it. But yes, you need to assess the students' work before you actually edit. Now, obviously, there are other things that go into. You may have to have brainstorm sessions where you sit down and you talk to them, or you let them talk to you before they actually write anything, and that discussion then becomes a way for you to assess how well they can do certain aspects of the campaign. So it's not necessarily the final written product that you assess. Just as long as you articulate in your write-up how you did it, it's pretty much, as long as you justify, it makes sense. I think you can probably stand on that.
Thanks, Sandy. We also have another question from Darcy. She wants to know, do you take into account learnings of an HR nature, such as the ability to manage a staff or group? If so, how?
Can you ask that question again, please?
Of course. Darcy wants to know, do you take into account of the learnings of an HR nature, such as the ability to manage a staff or group? If so, how do you do so?
Okay. Yes, I think if you want to set a goal, again, looking at those professional values and competencies, if you want to set a goal that they should be able to work together, that they can manage their time well and manage a staff, then you can certainly come up with a way to measure how well they've done that. And part of that has to do, if you go back to that matrix, and again, these slides will be available. At least I think they will be available. I guess Phil will have to tell us. Anyway, if you look at the matrix that I created, there is a question on how well they were able to use their time, how well they were able to work as a group. And so yes, I would think that you could easily assess how well they did that.
Thanks, Sandy. We have another question from Christy. She wants to know if you assign a grade based upon the final book or how each group performed. For example, would the media group earn a different grade than the research or creative group? And this is pertaining to the letter grade that the NSAC students receive at the end of the semester.
Well, now that grade isn't necessarily part of the assessment, but yeah, if you're asking me, can the media people do better than the creative people, then the answer to that is yes, because sometimes you just have, students who are really talented in one area and they're not very talented in the other. So yeah, I would think that you have to look at each section separately. I know I do that in the grades, and I also think you need to do that in terms of the assessment too. It depends on how you have the class divided up. If you've got more than one group and the group is responsible, the whole group is responsible for the entire book, then that would be graded differently than if you had one class doing everything and you had within the one class you had creative and media and so on. But yeah, I think you have to just justify what you want to do. The nice thing about assessment is that, and I've been on lots of site teams, the nice thing about assessment is you tell the site team, this is what we're doing. This is the way we organize this class. And they typically don't prescribe, well, you shouldn't be doing it like this. This is a better way to do it. Typically, as long as you justify the way you do it, then that's acceptable.
We also have another question from Mr. Wright pertaining to assessments. He wants to know, how do we quantify our preparation of student performance level? Isn't evaluating the book, for example, somewhat subjective?
Evaluating the book or evaluating how well the people, can you ask that again, please?
Of course. He wants to know, how do we quantify our preparation of student performance level? Isn't evaluating the book somewhat subjective?
Well, I think what you have to do is you have to know, you have to understand what the client wants, and based upon what the client wants, how well do you think the students met the client's needs? Now, that's tricky sometimes because I know often we are so close to the process that we can't necessarily be all that objective about the process. So it's often it's a challenge for us to be objective. I know I've been in situations where the advisors or the teachers are very caught up in how well their students' ideas are, and you just have to be as objective as you can be about the students. But yes, anytime you put a grade on something, you are, I think we just have to be very careful about knowing the difference between an A and an A- and a B and a B+. Are there any others?
Hi, Sandy.
Yes.
This is Phil. I believe that is all the questions that we have.
Okay. All right.
So unless there was unless there was something else that you wanted to touch on, we can go ahead and wrap things up.
I think maybe, Phil, if you could tell people how they might get the slides, or if I have, or are they going to be available, and if so, how, and if not, maybe we can send them.
Sure.
Send everybody.
What we're going to do is there's two ways. This presentation has actually been recorded, and it'll be posted on our website. And the website is www.aaf.org/from-the-source. That's aaf.org/from-the-source. And what they'll be able to do there is they'll see a link. It'll be right at the top for archived presentations, and this will be there. And I should have it up there by, I'd say, lunchtime tomorrow. In addition to that, I'll go ahead and have you send me your edited version of this presentation, the PowerPoint, and we'll post that as well. So everything will be available.
Okay. Well, guys, I wanted to let you know that the last slide that I'm still looking at has my email address on it, and I welcome you to send me any questions that you might have. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Sandy. I guess we are going to go ahead and end this webinar. And like I said, you can check out the website at www.aaf.org/from-the-source, and you can take a look at some of the future webinars that we have planned as they relate to education, and for other things as well. You can view archived presentations, and you can view the PowerPoints for those presentations as well. And feel free to send Sandy any questions that you have after this is over. So thanks to everybody who joined, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye, Sandy.